Welcome to today's webinar, brought to you by OraSure Technologies and Applicant Insight. OraSure Technologies is a global leader in oral fluid substance abuse products. Their unique assays provide accurate and easy-to-administer testing methods to help determine the presence or absence of drugs or alcohol in a person's system. Oral fluid-based testing products provide a simplified collection process, faster results, cost savings with minimal risk of tampering, and dramatically reduced risk of adulteration. The Intercept Oral Fluid Drug Test is an FDA-cleared laboratory-based oral fluid drug testing system that enables accurate testing for drugs of abuse, including marijuana, cocaine, PCP, amphetamines, and opiates. With a fast and easy-to-administer collection process, Intercept is ideal for workplace, criminal justice, drug treatment centers, and clinical setting screening programs, among others. Today's presentation is entitled Drug Testing Methods, the Advantages of Oral Fluid Testing, and will be presented by Bill Current and Bon Idziak. Bill Current is the president and founding partner of the Current Consulting Group and the publisher of the online Ultimate Guide to State Drug Testing Laws. He is the author of 10 books on substance-related issues, including the popular title, Why Drug Testing? CCG is a leading provider of drug testing policy writing services and works with companies to help them optimize their drug testing ROI. He also administers the annual Drug Testing Industry Survey, now in its 16th year. Bon Idziak is the CEO of Applicant Insight. Bon is a 16-year industry professional and subject matter expert on the topics of background screening, drug testing, and screening technology solutions. Well-versed in policy, procedure, and compliance, he is frequently asked to share his expertise at conferences and educational settings with industry, publications, and through various media outlets. Applicant Insight offers screening and reporting services for 200 countries and territories. They are the provider of choice for more than 3,000 organizations, including standard suite of more than 100 unique screening services. AI is HR XML certified and SSAE 16 certified for trouble-free integration with ATS and HRIS platforms. They are a proactive advocate for key industry initiatives through ongoing involvement in professional organizations such as the NAPBS, the HRXML Consortium, and SAPA. AI's Clinical Services Division provides substance abuse testing and clinical services focused on helping clients to implement a quality drug-free program. It will now be our pleasure to hear from Bill Current and Bon Idziak.
Well, thank you very much, Jessica, and I appreciate the opportunity to once again be participating in an OraSure-hosted webinar. And again, thanks to OraSure for putting on these webinars every month and providing this kind of valuable information to the industry. And I'm doubly excited today to be co-presenting with Bon Idziak. He's someone I've known for a number of years now and admire very much, and also Applicant Insight, one of the great companies in this industry. So looking forward to Bon's part of the presentation a little bit later. I'm going to really sort of set the table for some sort of real-world applications that Bon's going to share with you, and talk a little bit about how oral fluid testing in today's drug testing environment can work for different companies under different circumstances. I'm going to talk about some of the myths of oral fluid testing that are still very prominent and prevalent out there, and then provide some of the corresponding realities, the truths that sort of debunk these myths. And as I go through them, jot down your questions and let us know. You can use the Q&A function on the screen in front of you, or you can email them in to me at bill@billcurrent.com. We'll be looking for your questions, and then Bon and I will entertain those questions towards the end of today's presentation. I'm going to set the table essentially by sharing some basic information. I think we all know, most of the people on today's webinar, you're either an employer or you're somebody in the drug testing industry, and you know drug testing works. You perhaps administered a program, you're either a buyer or seller of drug testing, you've seen the before and after type of results. There are a lot of stats and studies out there that talk about the effectiveness of drug testing, and I think it's sort of beyond refute anymore these days about the value of drug testing. There are certainly people and organizations that oppose drug testing for different reasons, but you rarely, if ever, see a challenge to a drug test in which they're challenging the accuracy of the technology or the science. They're really never talking about that. They'll concede the fact that the test is positive. They're really sort of challenging it on other issues like the procedures, the confidentiality, things of that nature. Were you compliant with the state laws that apply to your company, et cetera? But drug testing works. It helps to deter drug use. It helps to identify people who need help. And for companies that do drug testing, it's very rare to find one that would give up drug testing, even though sometimes in today's economic environment, it's a cost that they keep a very close eye on, but they're really not willing to give it up because they've seen the before and after results. But there are different ways to do drug testing. Today, it goes beyond just the traditional urine test. And I say that as somebody who is a 100% committed proponent of urine drug testing, whether it's in a lab or through a point of collection device. I'm a fan of all kinds of drug testing. As long as it's done right, it's compliant with the laws that apply, any type of drug testing program, or I should say modality, can work for you, okay? The different matrices that are available, they're all good. It just depends on which one's right for you. A traditional testing method that many companies are familiar with and still use involves collecting a urine sample, typically at an off-site collection site, and then transporting that sample overnight to a laboratory, a certified laboratory in most cases. There's a screen conducted. If it's non-negative, meaning it's positive, there's presence of at least one of the drugs you're testing for, then it will be confirmed, usually with gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, GCMS, or an equivalent type of confirmation testing technology. And if that result is confirmed positive, a medical review officer will attempt to verify it by contacting the donor, and then once the result has been verified, it gets reported. Now, there's different laws that apply and how results get reported in writing, if it has to go through an MRO first, et cetera, but it gets reported. And those are a lot of steps to go through, but it's sort of the gold standard of drug testing. The pros and cons of urine testing, I think, are well known among those who use it, as well as those who have decided not to use it anymore. First of all, it's accurate. If it's done right, if you follow the proper procedures, you're using a certified laboratory, et cetera, it's accurate. There's really no question about that. It's also legal. Urine testing is legal in every state in this country, and as you go outside the United States, it's legal in most countries. Not all countries. There are places in the world where oral fluid and hair testing are preferred methods and even legal versus urine testing, but in the United States, it's legal in every state, and it's proven to work. The cons, of course, is that it's urine, which for some companies that may be an issue. It takes a little bit more time to do a urine test. The collection versus a hair collection, and certainly an oral fluid collection, is a little bit more time-consuming, and certainly it's susceptible to drug test cheating. I mean, there's a cottage industry out there that is making millions of dollars every year trying to help people cheat on their urine tests, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. The advantages of lab-based oral fluid testing is that it's accurate, it's legal, and it works. They've got the same benefits as urine testing has. But there are still, as I say, a lot of myths out there, a lot of misinformation about lab-based oral fluid testing. And throughout today's presentation, I'm going to make the distinction between lab-based oral fluid testing and point of collection or instant result, rapid result testing, because there's a big difference between the two. And I've got a couple of slides on that coming up a little bit later as well. But the advantages of oral fluid testing, regardless of what method you use, what product you use, are pretty appealing. I mean, just like with a negative urine test result, you can get the result within 24 hours. It's legal almost in every state. I'm going to take you through that in a minute. Legally defensible technology is considered reliable, scientifically accurate. It's probably a more accurate method of measuring recent use, and I'm going to talk about that in more detail. And it's virtually adulteration proof, and I've got some good slides coming up on that as well. The primary advantage of oral fluid testing for a lot of companies is really what they're looking for is in the collection process. Some of the collection issues that are sort of inherent with urine testing virtually go away altogether when it comes to oral fluid collections. And I've got a few of them here on this page right now. That's what a lot of companies like about oral fluid testing, is that it takes away some of the hassles that are just part of doing urine testing. There's just no way around it when it comes to urine testing. With oral fluid testing, many of those issues go away entirely, if not are reduced significantly. I do this survey every year, as Jessica mentioned. We're in our 16th year of interviewing experts in the drug testing industry. Bon has actually participated in our survey a number of years. And what I'm hearing from people in the industry, people who sell drug testing for a living, is that they're seeing greater interest in oral fluid testing. They're seeing increase in sales of oral fluid testing. It fits in certain situations like post-accident. You see a lot of companies, or unreasonable suspicion. You do see companies combining oral fluid testing with urine testing in much the same way that you see urine testing being combined with hair testing in the trucking industry. You see a lot of companies starting to look at doing oral fluid testing for some testing situations and still using urine for pre-employment. It's really getting the best of both worlds. It's taking advantage of the unique advantages of each of these different testing methods and combining them into a single program. And so we're hearing from people in the industry during our industry survey that more and more companies are looking at that as well. But let's kind of look at the companies that seem to be most interested in oral fluid testing right now, keeping in mind that right now the federal government is looking at and in the process of developing regulations that will make it permissible to use lab-based oral fluid testing in SAMHSA-regulated programs. And so within the federal government, you've got the Drug Testing Advisory Board in that process. It's an ongoing process. We're not there yet. But what it's done, it's sort of signaled to the industry and to the markets, to employers, that lab-based oral fluid testing is on its way. And the Department of Transportation has even signaled also publicly that once those SAMHSA regulations are modified to allow lab-based oral fluid testing, you're going to see they're going to look at adding it to the DOT regulations, and then you're really going to see, I think most people in the industry are saying, you're going to see a fairly significant increase, not only just in interest, but companies adopting it, and again, not only for DOT-required programs, but outside of DOT and those non-mandated drug testing type of programs. And that's because there are a lot of companies right now that are sort of under the gun to justify the expense of everything that they're doing, including drug testing. And so they're looking for ways to streamline their program and to continue to get as attractive as possible return on investment from their drug testing program. And so they're looking for different ways to do it in search of a streamlined process that improves that ROI. But it's also attractive to companies that are in sort of out-of-the-way locations, rural areas, companies with 24-hour shifts, safety-sensitive companies, where the use of what we would typically consider the conventional or the traditional off-site collection services are really just sort of impractical. They may be too expensive. They may not even be in a conveniently existent way available to a lot of these companies. And so in those situations, the availability of lab-based oral fluid testing makes a lot of sense. And so these are companies that are really sort of not, they just don't match, or their needs don't align well with the benefits of urine testing. And so we see companies in various industries in the workplace markets as well as the non-workplace markets that are showing an increased interest in oral fluid testing. And that's why it's become so important to talk about some of the myths that are surrounding oral fluid testing. Some of these barriers are starting to come down, but some of them are still in place. I still get these questions on a regular basis, especially the last one, oral fluid testing is not legal in the state where I do business. And of course, I'm going to take you through that, but that's typically just not the case at all. But that myth still exists. And it exists among drug testing providers as well as potential buyers. So let's go through some of these. We're kind of going to go through it quickly. I want to make sure that Bon has enough time for his part of the presentation and then the kind of interaction that we're going to do as well. The first one I'm going to talk about is accuracy. The truth of the matter is that lab-based oral fluid testing, especially an FDA-approved collection device and testing system, is accurate. It's been proven to be accurate. It's why the federal government is looking at lab-based oral fluid testing. Again, I make the distinction here between lab-based oral fluid testing and POCT oral fluid testing. And again, I point out the fact that I'm a fan of POCT oral fluid testing also. But right now, the federal government's only looking at lab-based oral fluid testing. And part of the reason for that is that over the years, the science has proven to be sound. The advancements that have been made in the technology are keeping up with those of urine testing. And so the federal government's looking at and in the process of developing those regulations, Part of it is because the presence of drugs in oral fluid, as it says right in the underlying part, is related to the amount of drugs that are in the bloodstream when the sample is collected. Oral fluid provides what scientists would call a blood equivalent type of result. The smartest people in our industry will tell you that blood is truly, from a scientific standpoint, the gold standard of drug testing. But it's really impractical for a lot of obvious reasons, right? It's expensive, it's invasive, and in many states don't even allow blood drug testing for the workplace. Oral fluid mimics blood from a scientific standpoint. You're able to detect both the parent drug as well as the metabolite of the drug. In urine, you're only finding the metabolite of a drug, but with an oral fluid sample, you can detect both the parent and the metabolite, and that's what makes it possible to have the very, very recent use detection abilities of oral fluid testing. You can detect most drugs, and I've got some slides coming up on this as well, immediately after the individual has ingested the drugs. And so the advances in the technology and the collection capabilities of oral fluid testing, plus that ability to detect recent drug use of both, and to be able to detect the parent and the metabolite, are very, very important. And those are unique to oral fluid testing. I always tell people, though, do your own research. Make sure that you've studied the data that's out there. Look for independent empirical data that's going to be in peer-reviewed journals. Don't rely simply on the marketing material that comes with the product. Make sure you're dealing with an FDA-cleared device, not just the device itself, the collection device, but the assays as well. It's one thing to say that the collection device, is FDA-cleared, but you want to make sure that the individual drugs that you're testing for with that device at the laboratory are FDA-cleared as well, to the extent possible. Ask for references, of course. Ask for references that are similar to you and your company or you and your clients. Do your own research. Put the package insert to the test. Every product comes with a package insert, and that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where it talks about usability, user-friendliness of the device, how it's going to perform. And you can read that package insert and put that information to the test. Ask your provider that you're thinking of doing business with for some sample product so you can do your own little internal research and know who you're doing business with. That's a big important part of this. If you're going to switch to a different testing method, make sure you're dealing with somebody who's going to support you going forward with policy help, state law help, dealing with technical issues that come up, answering questions that are invariably going to arise as you make the transition from one testing method to another. But when it comes to accuracy, it really comes down to the positivity rates of oral fluid testing versus any other testing method. In this case, in the chart we're looking at, it's urine testing. This is where you tell if you're losing positives that you were getting with urine. And you can see that middle column there under the word intercept, and that's the name of the OraSure device. That represents lab-based oral fluid testing versus the column on the far right, which is urine testing. And you can see that it's 4.1 at the top versus 4.4, very close. But look down there under THC, very, very close, 2.5, actually a little bit higher with oral fluid testing. The biggest discrepancy where urine testing makes the most ground and takes the lead is right there on the top with amphetamine. So where it really matters, these positives, you're seeing that it's very, very similar. But the question that often comes up is the window of detection. How long can I detect the drugs that I'm testing for in an oral fluid sample versus a urine sample? And there are people with the misunderstanding that the window of detection is so short with oral fluid testing that you're just not going to get the positives that you're normally used to getting with a different testing method. That's really not true. The window of detection is different, but it's affected by lots of different things. The specimen being tested, the drugs that you're testing for, every drug has its own unique window of detection. A lot of other factors come into play. But this chart shows what the window of detection typically is for each of the four major testing methods. And again, blood really not used in the workplace, but let's compare it because I said oral fluid is the sort of scientific equivalent of blood when it comes to the result. So you can see that on the far left of our chart here, you've got the red and the blue lines together representing when the window of detection opens with each of those testing methods, with those specimens. It opens almost immediately after the individual has ingested the drug. Right next to it, just a little bit to the right, is the yellow line representing urine testing, and you can see that there is a little bit of lag time in the ability to detect the drugs that's in someone's system in urine versus oral fluid and blood. That's why somebody goes on a lunch break, for example, they come back smelling of marijuana, all the other sort of outward signs are there. It meets the criteria for a reasonable suspicion test according to your drug testing policy. If you test them with oral fluid, you're going to catch them. They're going to test positive if they were smoking a joint out in the parking lot during their lunch break. With urine testing, at that front end of the window of detection, you're probably not going to get a positive right away because it's too soon. The window hasn't opened up with urine. But to urine's advantage, that window of detection is going to stay open a little longer. So you can see the blue line coming out and going out a few days there, a day, 2, 3, whatever it may be. Again, depends on the drug, right? And the cutoff levels, actually. But then urine is going to go out for a period of more days. So you're going to get some positives on the front end with oral fluid testing that you're going to miss with urine testing. But you're going to get some positives on the back end of that window of detection with urine that you might miss with oral fluid testing. That's why when you look at the positives, they're so similar. There's not big, giant discrepancies between the major drugs that you're testing for, particularly, THC, where the positivity rate actually a little higher with lab-based oral fluid testing, but very, very close with urine testing. And THC represents the vast majority of positives when it comes to drug testing. So you want to know as an employer what you're giving up, if anything, by switching from urine to oral fluid. And the truth of the matter is as far as positives go, when we're talking about lab-based oral fluid testing, you're really not giving up anything, especially if your major concern is is reasonable suspicion or post-accident testing. Now, I've talked about marijuana a little bit. The good news is that, yes, with an oral fluid sample, you can detect THC, the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana. And that's very, very important to know, especially in today's environment where a lot of states are looking at different ways to legalize marijuana. It is detectable in oral fluid testing almost immediately after the person has ingested the drugs. But a lot depends, again, on cutoff levels. It depends on the technology, whether we're talking about lab-based versus point-of-collection oral fluid testing, okay? That has a great impact on the positivity outcome of your drug testing program. Let me show you this chart. Now that vertical red dotted line in the middle there represents 50 nanograms per milliliter as a cutoff. Everything to the right of it is greater than 50 nanograms, and everything to the left of it is less than 50 nanograms per milliliter. And you can see from the verbiage on the page that 80% of marijuana positives are actually below 50 nanograms in oral fluid. So the majority of them, if you kind of scan to the left a little bit further, are less than 20 nanograms per milliliter. So if you're using a testing method, whether in the lab or especially with point of collection, with a cutoff level for THC at 30, 35, 40, certainly 50 or higher, you're going to miss a lot of positives. You're going to miss all of those tall blue bars to the left of the red dotted line. So a lot depends on the technology when you talk about oral fluid testing, especially comparing lab-based and POCT. It depends on what you're looking for. Again, I'm a fan of oral fluid testing with point of collection devices. It just depends on what works for you, what meets your needs. If you're not concerned about THC, then the cutoff levels that are typically used with many oral fluid POCT devices are going to be 40 nanograms, 50 nanograms or higher. But if that's important to you, you need to look at this data because the vast majority of THC positives are less than 50 nanograms per milliliter. Now, a lot of people think that any kind of drug testing method is easy to cheat on, subject to adulteration. But the truth of the matter is lab-based oral fluid testing is very difficult to cheat on, any type of oral fluid testing, much more difficult for a cheater to be successful at cheating than with urine testing. And as I mentioned, urine testing, cheating on a urine test has become a cottage industry. You can go online right now, type in something like cheating on a drug test, beating a drug test, something of that nature. You will literally get hundreds of thousands of potential websites that you can visit, all offering advice or offering to sell you a product that will help you mask the presence of the drug, and successfully cheat so you can pass a urine drug test. There's not a lot of information out there on oral fluid testing. I did find some, though. On one website, the advice they gave was try to avoid the test. If you're going to be subject to an oral fluid test, a saliva collection, it says, then avoid submitting your saliva. Another site said between certain periods of time, avoid being screened, or you will surely test positive. These are the people who are trying to make a living helping people cheat on drug tests, and they're telling you that if you want to pass an oral fluid test, avoid giving them your oral fluid, your saliva, because if you do, you're going to test positive. I have another one. I didn't have time to put it up on this slide. It basically was offering this mouthwash product, and it said, we guarantee that you will pass your drug test using our product. Step 1, stop using drugs at least 24 hours before being tested. Voila. The best advice any website can give to a drug user who needs to pass a drug test, simply stop using drugs. When it comes to oral fluid, stop using, because you're going to test positive if you try to get away with your oral fluid, cheating on your oral fluid test. Now, this whole question about expense, we could do an entire webinar on the money side of oral fluid testing versus other testing methods. Again, it comes down to what's right for you. Some testing methods are going to be less than others. Point of collection testing is usually less expensive than lab-based testing as you factor in all the different cost categories. So that's true when you're comparing lab-based oral fluid testing and POC2 oral fluid testing, or lab urine versus POCT urine, and especially when you start to mix them together. So I've just put a few numbers together, and I got a lot of help from Applicant Insight on this to use some numbers that we were all comfortable with. So one, thank you to Applicant Insight for their help on this. These are the numbers that we came up with. Let me just say as a disclaimer, these may not be your numbers, okay? You put in the numbers that you're comfortable with and see what the return on investment ratio is when we get down to the bottom line. These are the numbers we decided to go with. Using a national average for clinic collection fees, we put in $17 to collect a urine sample at an off-site collection site. Yes, patient service centers will be less than that. Some other third-party collectors will be more than that. So we went with $17. But with oral fluid testing, because the collection is actually so much easier to do, you don't necessarily have to use professional technicians to do the collection. You can train employees in the company, managers, supervisors, et cetera. Maybe you have on-staff health employees, healthcare employees. They can do it. And so you've eliminated at least the cost, the hard dollar cost of collection. The drug test price, including lab and administration, we've bundled in confirmation and MRO into that $28 fee, $29, a little bit more for the lab-based test. We've got no cost for the confirmation and the MRO because we've bundled them into the second line there. Our total, as we add collection and lab, et cetera, is $45 for urine and $29 for oral fluid. So we're already ahead of the game with oral fluid. Again, depends on which testing method meets your needs. But there are other cost factors that are worth considering. For example, it takes time to send a worker to an off-site collection site. It also takes time to take that worker off the line and have them come to an office to provide an oral fluid sample. So there is some lost productivity. And so we've only factored in an hourly rate. We haven't even factored in any fringe rate at about 40%, okay? The worker himself or herself who's being tested, let's say we're paying them $10.10 an hour. They're going to be gone for an hour and a half at an off-site collection site, which is about average, maybe even a little bit generous towards the 1.5 versus a couple of hours. That's going to come out to $15.15 for lost productivity for the urine test. It's only going to take about 15 minutes for that individual to be off the line providing a saliva sample. So they're really only off for about 15 minutes, a quarter of an hour at $10.10 an hour. That's only $2.53. There's also going to be somebody else involved, right? If it's a post-accident reasonable suspicion test, you're going to send a supervisor with that individual to the collection site. Let's say he or she's making $24 an hour. They're gone for an hour and a half, so that's costing you $36 in lost productivity. But we're still going to have to use somebody to administer that test for the oral fluid in the yellow line there. That's we're estimating that at about 15 minutes at $24. That's a quarter of $24, so that's $6. Our total amount of dollars lost in productivity under urine is $51.15 for oral fluid. it's just $8.53. And when I add it all together, the actual cost of a urine drug test using an off-site collector is almost $100, and for oral fluid, it's less than $40. And so when you're thinking about this as an employer or as a drug testing provider and you're presenting this to a potential buyer, you need to help them understand what a drug test really costs. Now, everything comes down to, is it worth it? So it may be worth it to that employer to use the urine testing program. If it's DOT, for example, they have no choice, right? Until those regulations change, they have to use urine. And there are some states where there may be a workers' comp law in place that requires a lab-based urine test. There may be an industry-specific law, like in Illinois, where they have a public works contractors drug testing law that requires public works contractors to use lab-based urine testing, et cetera, et cetera. There are scenarios where you have to use urine testing. But when you have a choice and when the bottom line is a determining factor, you want to be able to present this information to a potential buyer so that they can see what a drug test really costs. And again, you can put in whatever numbers you want to put in. I think it really comes down to what you're most comfortable with, what meets your needs as an employer, or you as a seller or provider of drug testing, what you're comfortable offering. Hopefully, some of the information we've provided today has put these myths in their proper place. We've debunked some of those myths to make sure that you've got correct information. So if you have employers, potential buyers that are coming to you asking about oral fluid testing, and you're going to see an increase in that as those regulations come closer and closer to reality, you're going to want to be able to know the truth about oral fluid testing so you can present that information and be a consultant to your client and not simply a seller. Now, there are a lot of people that think that oral fluid testing is not FDA cleared, and that's because there are a lot of POCT oral fluid devices on the market that are not FDA cleared. But there is at least one POCT oral fluid testing, and there are at least 3 lab-based oral fluid testing methods, including the OraSure Intercept device, that are FDA cleared. And when we're talking about FDA clearance, we need to make sure that we're talking about 2 things. FDA clearance on the collection device itself, as well as on the assays that you're testing for. We do a whole presentation on the subject of testing for the right drugs. If you're not testing for the drugs that people are using today, then you really don't know for sure that you've got a drug-free workplace. Well, you want to make sure that you're testing for the drugs that people are using and that those assays are FDA cleared as well as the collection device. So you can see in that last bullet that with the Intercept device, and again, this is not intended to be a commercial for Intercept, there are 9 assays that have been FDA cleared. You could test for more than these 9 with other devices or even in the laboratory where you're delivering the sample that was collected with Intercept. But these are the 9 assays that have been FDA cleared, and that gives you some assurance. There are some state laws that only allow employers to test with a product that's FDA cleared, and testing methods that are similar to or equal to what you see with lab-based urine testing through a SAMHSA certified laboratory. It's not apples to apples. I'm not suggesting that, but you want to make sure that if you're ever challenged, you can go back and you can show that your program has integrity built into it because you're using products that are FDA cleared, you're testing for assays that are FDA cleared, you're using a certified laboratory, even though there's no SAMHSA certification right now for oral fluid testing, but still you're using a certified laboratory that is used to following certain protocols that protect the accuracy and the integrity of every sample that you send into them. Now, very quickly, I'm just going to take a minute on this. Oral fluid testing, legal in all but 3 states, Maine, Vermont, Hawaii, in terms of states with mandatory drug testing laws, where if you do drug testing in that state, you are mandated to follow the law that is provided. Maine, Vermont, and Hawaii, plus the territory of Puerto Rico, require urine testing. There are some states, like here in Florida where I live and where Bond lives, where we have a voluntary drug testing law. It offers a premium discount in your workers' compensation premiums if you follow guidelines that are provided by the state. It's voluntary. You have to apply to get into the program. But if you get into it, you can qualify for a 5% discount in your workers' compensation premiums, and that can really be worth it. Outside of the voluntary guidelines in Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Ohio, and a number of other states, you're not mandated to follow those voluntary guidelines. But if you're in that voluntary program, like here in Florida, the Drug-Free Workplace program here in Florida, then you have to follow those guidelines. Alaska, Florida, Mississippi, Ohio, South Dakota, and Tennessee are 6 states with voluntary drug testing laws that do not permit oral fluid testing. And there are a number of states, as I'm showing here, that do not allow point-of-collection testing. So if you were considering doing POCT oral fluid, you would want to know that in Kansas and Minnesota, for example, you can't do POCT, therefore you can't do POCT oral fluid testing. There are lots of other issues to take into account. It's not just a matter of, yes, we can test with oral fluid, so, you're ready to go to town. You have to follow all the other protocols and procedural requirements that are built into the state laws that apply to you. You can't just do it and not follow those guidelines. And so the state laws that apply to you will have information in there about how tests get reported, whether retests are required, the storage of specimens, split specimen requirements, the use of a certified laboratory, collection procedures, observed collections, all types of issues come into play. And if you're switching from urine to oral fluid, you need to know what those requirements are because they're going to apply to your oral fluid testing program in the same way that they apply to your urine testing program, almost in every instance without exception. Now, the folks at Applicant Insight, they deal with these issues every day. They have clients that are interested in oral fluid testing, that are dealing with the different challenges of converting to oral fluid testing or considering it. So they're sort of in the real world dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to turn the virtual microphone, if you will, over to Bon now so he can talk a little bit about some of the things that they've encountered as they're offering that oral fluid testing to their clients and prospective clients.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. And greetings from sunny, warm, humid Florida. Actually, Bill, I didn't realize you were a resident of the great state of Florida. I'm just learning that after all these years. So first of all, I wish that in today's competitive marketplace, I was still getting $28 plus the cost of collection for a urine drug test. So I'll have to thank our marketing team for providing you with those figures. But now at least my competitors can stop wondering whether or not they can go after our client base with their existing urine drug testing prices. So sorry, guys. I want to talk about a specific customer, and this use case is significant when contemplating the use of oral fluids for many reasons. First of all, it's a very complex customer, and I'm going to walk through the components of the customer's environment that make it complex so that you can understand why we chose a blend of drug test methodologies to satisfy this customer's needs. First of all, the majority of their facilities are in fact remote. So logistically, it becomes difficult to get collectors to go on site to their facilities. Obviously, that's critical in a large manufacturing environment with multiple shifts. It's also difficult to send individuals to a clinic in the event of a random selection or a reasonable suspicion drug test. The human resource organization within this use case is also decentralized. So it becomes difficult to manage policies and procedures as it relates to the drug testing program when you have a decentralized HR function and decisions are made independently by field locations. Next challenge for us was this organization does not have designated safety personnel. So there might be in one division of this company one safety manager who works out of a regional facility that has safety responsibilities for all of its facilities. There may also be on-site safety personnel that have overall responsibilities for the safety within the plant, but not a specific focus on drug use or drug dependency. And it's an organization that has known drug issues in areas of the country where there is drug abuse that affects every level of employee and every business within a region or a geography. And anyone on this call who has any experience in drug testing or works with multi-state customers know what some of these issues are. And then the final issue and obstacle that we really had to overcome with this customer was multiple shifts. And so the project starts out with a review of the policy and procedures. That presented an issue on its own because this particular organization outsources all of its legal counsel. And so we were working with a third party who not only oversaw the redevelopment of their drug testing policy, but also had a state representative, so an attorney in each state where this customer has a facility, who worked through the state laws, issues, best practices, and industry standards with us to ensure that the new policy ultimately met the overall policy objectives of this particular customer. And I think it's the first time in my career of almost 20 years in drug testing that I had to work with a attorney in each state who collaborated with one another to develop a single policy that would cover an entire company's organization. Finally, identifying solutions that met the company's corporate policy objectives in having that multi-state policy that could ensure that the drug use, drug dependency, drug abuse was actively tested and monitored from a pre-employment random reasonable suspicion and post-accident standpoint. And one of the debates that we had, that we still have with this customer ongoing, in fact, is the use of point-of-collection testing devices and lab-based devices. And we're constantly challenged by different onlookers of the program, from workers' compensation claims attorneys to unemployment officials that are evaluating dismissals for drug tests, and some of those states' laws and rules that are not necessarily as black and white as they may be in other states, but leave some objectivity up to the reviewer or the implementer or the enforcer of those laws within those states when working through actions that are taken from a workers' compensation or an unemployment standpoint. Fortunately, we did not, with this particular customer, even though they do have DOT operations, have to deal with any union facilities. As we all know, that adds on a layer of complexity to implementing a new drug testing policy that we did not have to consider in this particular scenario. So we came together as a team. There were representatives from each of the areas that we've discussed, from corporate security, from corporate HR, business unit leaders from each of the separate divisions, as well as my subject matter experts and team members on my staff who assisted with the development of the new policy. And ultimately, there were two considerations that were paramount in the development of this policy, and that is both knowing who are the drug users and who is using drugs. And I think that we all know that those are two very different and distinct things. There is the drug user, who is the addict, the person that can't go for 48 to 72 hours, Bill, to beat a drug test without using, and the circumstantial drug user, as I like to call them, or the person who occasionally uses illegal drugs due to peer pressure or the circumstances of their environment that lead them down a path that they would normally just satisfy with alcohol. And so we're talking about weekend partiers or holiday partiers, or individuals who go out with the wrong person at lunch on payday, and because that person is using, they elect to use as well. And so what are the methodologies that can be considered that tackle both of these issues? Who are the addicts and who are the circumstantial drug users? So we developed a program with this client that contemplates both the drug user or abuser on the front end with pre-employment testing, and the circumstantial drug user or addict who is using in the workplace or during work hours after the hire has already been made. And interestingly enough, statistically, when we implemented their pre-employment drug testing program, we initiated a pilot of pre-employment urine versus pre-employment hair testing. And I think that those of us in the industry will laugh at the pre-employment urine testing, because we all agree that that is somewhat of an IQ test. If you're not smart enough to pass a pre-employment drug test, then there should be serious consideration given to any task you might be performing within a company, not just those that you're being hired for. But this company's overall pre-employment drug test positive rate for urinalysis is 5%. And under the pilot program for hair testing, which, by the way, is not yet implemented corporate-wide, it is 18%. And those figures are really significant when you look at who are the drug abusers, who are the folks that are going to continue to use after they're hired into your facilities, which, by the way, you hope to be able to sift through using your random and reasonable suspicion post-accident testing with whatever methodology you implement. So after the pre-employment testing, we, of course, have the ongoing random program management, and there are components of this program that have to comply with DOT. It's a small percentage of the overall employee base. The larger percentage is a non-regulated component. And so we implemented both a point of collection test and a lab-based oral fluids test for two reasons. The first reason is to screen out initially anyone who may test positive on a point of collection testing device and remove them from service until the lab-based oral fluids device test can be evaluated and reported. And we find that there is a small disparity between positives on the point of collection testing device, where we have false positives that are then confirmed as negative by the lab-based device, and the flip of that, which is the negative on the point of collection testing device, that is then confirmed as a positive on the lab-based oral fluids collection device. And the reason for that is because there are different cutoff levels for certain drugs. And as Bill discussed here, we're not just looking at the metabolite that is found in the urine specimen, we're also looking for the presence of the drug itself and what the concentration of that drug is, how much there is in the person's system. And so we do find that program for the random testing is very convenient for this client because we've completely eliminated the collection site issues and the mobile collection personnel that were previously needed in the random testing program that utilized a urine point of collection device that was confirmed with laboratory testing. We also eliminated the issue with decentralized human resources in that the new policy addressed that and pushed forth objectives that met all of the concerns from each of the business units or separate parts of the organization. We eliminated the call for designated safety personnel on reasonable suspicion and post-accident testing by enabling any member of the supervisory team within the manufacturing organization to collect the specimen and administer the tests. And we've tackled known drug issues. So when we are concerned now at one of those facilities about someone being a drug user, we administer a test immediately, and that test tells us if at that point in time the person is under the influence of any illegal drugs. No longer difficult to make that detection. And we were also able to tackle multiple shifts because now this program can be administered by practically anyone and at any time. Also adding to the flexibility within the organizational structure of this manufacturing organization, we have the ability to have specimens collected with oral fluids devices at clinic facilities if the management at the plant does not feel like they are properly resourced in order to make those collections themselves. We also have the ability to have on-site collectors, professional collectors, come and collect those specimens where those facilities have had significant issues or legal challenges in the past, and they want an additional layer of support from a legal standpoint when administering their program. So ultimately, with an overall random percentage rate of now 7% for the lab-based oral fluids devices, we know that we are meeting some of those initial objectives centered around who is using drugs in our facilities. So all in all, the complexity of the program as it relates to their pre-employment testing, the issues centered around conforming to all of the state laws, working with different vendors for different test types and methodologies, and meeting the needs of the client overall with keeping the drug abusers out of their facilities has been extremely successful. It's a good case study to use because we've been able to evaluate within a single employee population all of the existing methodologies that are available, of course minus the best, which is blood, which we can't really use, to monitor and manage drug use and abuse in our workplaces. So, Bill, I thought that this was a great customer story to tell. I would imagine that we have folks on the phone with us and tuned into the presentation that have had to address all of these issues in the past. I would also recommend for anyone that the value of a third-party administrator of a drug and alcohol testing program is demonstrated by the effective management and implementation of one of these programs. The overall knowledge regarding how an industry is affected by drug use or abuse and a third-party administrator's presence in that industry to share those best practices and industry standards, and also the knowledge of each of the different drug testing methodologies and the most appropriate use of those methodologies based on the window of detection, the look-back period, are certainly critical in developing any successful drug testing program. And with that, Bill, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Bon. That was great. We've actually had some questions come in while you were talking, and I think our audience would probably appreciate your perspective. So let me share a couple of them with you. One, somebody asked the question, I understand that not all labs provide oral fluid analysis the same way as every other lab. Is this true, and how would you choose a laboratory if you were going to use oral fluid testing?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, the device and the testing methodology are equally important. So you wouldn't want to just look at the laboratory. You would want to also look at the manufacturer, as Bill mentioned earlier in the presentation. There is GCMS confirmation of a positive result. There is LCMS confirmation of a positive result. There's discussion and debate within the industry. The actual analysis itself, looking at the specimen and determining whether or not the drug or the metabolites are present, is not as critical or as important as the confirmation of that, which looks at the specimen in greater detail. GCMS is the known standard for confirmation. The lesser known standard of that is LCMS. LCMS is really the new gold standard as it relates to that specimen analysis, but either are just as relevant and are just as have equally high quality as it relates to the confirmation of the test. It's just that LCMS employs a newer technology than GCMS does.
Okay, perfect. And again, I just want to point out to our audience that different testing methods and which one you choose will be determined by a number of factors that you have to deal with. For one company, a certain method makes sense, even though it may cost a little bit more, or maybe the return on investment ratio is not as attractive as another method. And that sort of leads to this next question. While you were speaking, somebody asked the question, Bon, how would you respond to somebody who says that POCT oral fluid testing is just as good and even cheaper than lab-based oral fluid testing? Do you get many inquiries at Applicant Insight on point-of-collection oral fluid testing?
Well, I'm going to laugh just a little bit before I answer that question, only because I wish it were the authority of the third-party administrator that dictated the drug test methodologies within an organization. Oftentimes, it is the subject matter expert within that organization making the decision on methodologies based on what they've read, what they've heard, webinars that they've attended, no offense to either you or I with respect of our content today. And while we may attempt to steer a potential customer in a direction, or even an existing customer, related to best practices or industry standards, quite frankly, they often come to us with what they feel is the best means to test their applicants or employees for drugs. So we, as a third-party administrator, work with all of the laboratories that are certainly up to our standard as far as the analysis that they conduct. We work with over 30,000 clinics and collection sites across the United States. We have a very strong medical review organization, and I think collectively our recommendation would always be that if you're going to rely on a point of collection test to take a decision, certainly on a person's employment, that at the very minimum you follow that up with laboratory analysis of that specimen. Now, with oral fluids, there are some challenges because there are not devices available that do the collection of the specimen with enough specimen for a point of collection test that then can have laboratory confirmation. Usually there's some sort of a secondary device or secondary collection that's needed, which is ultimately why our use case customer decided just to use two separate devices. And then, of course, we have the proof that the lab-based test provides a higher positive rate than the point of collection test device based on this customer's history of thousands and thousands of tests, as well as others that we have a very similar situation for, based on the false positives and the false negatives of each testing methodology. So, there's no magic bullet when it comes to drug testing. If you're not aware of this, there are several factors that have to be taken into consideration with respect to anybody's drug use and windows of detection: the amount of water they drink, their body fat percentage, how much fatty foods they ingest, different kinds of medications that can initially screen as positive that ultimately result in a negative after medical review. Those are all factors that have to be taken into consideration and that are used in determining what the relative cutoff levels are and what determines whether or not the end result of a drug test is positive or not positive. So that's a really long answer to a very simple question. There are very relevant uses of point of collection testing devices that have no laboratory analysis, but the restrictions that exist and the laws that are in place that prohibit point of collection testing devices in many different scenarios exist for a reason. So I always say, buyer beware, make sure that you understand what it is that you're getting, and know that you get what you pay for.
Now, Vaughn, I know that we have a lot of Applicant Insight clients and customers on the line today, which may be why we keep getting the question, will we be able to get a link to the recording of today's webinar? They want to hear you talk a little bit more. They want to hear this over and over again. So, to all of those who are on today's webinar, yes, you will be getting a link to the recording of today's presentation within about 24 hours of today's presentation. We're running out of time, Vaughn, but there was one other question. There were several questions, and so if we don't get to your question today, we will respond to it after the webinar through email. But let me just get to this other question because it was pertinent to your part of the presentation, Vaughn. You talked about blending different technologies or methods into one single program. I assumed in this case it was a combination of oral fluid and urine testing. And so I guess the question that is being asked here is, are you seeing more of this, and do you predict that more companies will take advantage of different technologies by blending them into a single program?
Yeah, we are absolutely seeing more of it, and it's environmental as well. So it depends on the type of customer. Obviously, if we have a trucking company that we work with, then their methodology is going to be primarily urine-based because the industry has not yet adopted some of the alternative testing methodologies that are available. I believe that we'll continue to see trends that move in the direction of a blended approach to testing, just based off of the statistical data that's available that determines the positive drug test rate. I mean, if I were the CEO of a large manufacturing organization, and someone came to me with a 5%, 7%, 18% statistic and a difference between urinalysis, oral fluids, and hair testing for pre-employment drug testing, then I think I would have to seriously consider the 18% result, regardless of how long it took to process that specimen, or regardless of how expensive it was to administer. Because if my goal is to eliminate drug abusers from my workforce, that is the statistic that best suits that purpose, right? Then again, if what I'm really looking to do is just adopt a satisfactory level of mitigation within my facilities, then a urine test or an oral fluids test for pre-employment can be very sufficient in meeting those goals and objectives. Being able to speak to the right test for the right purpose, I think, is critical in understanding the motivation of your customer as it relates to their drug testing program and exactly what their policy is. Is it a zero tolerance policy, or do they institute a policy of tolerance and acceptance and provide assistance and rehabilitation for drug users, are also serious considerations in the type of drug test program you put together.
Excellent. Thank you, Bon. Before I turn the microphone back over to Jessica for the conclusion, let me just once again express my appreciation to Bon Idziak and Applicant Insight for participating in today's webinar. Excellent information, Bon. And also, again, thank you to OraSure Technologies, the host and co-sponsor of today's webinar, for providing this webinar series from month to month. If you're on today's call, if you're interested in receiving more information about future OraSure webinars, just follow the information or contact Applicant Insight, and they will be happy to provide information to you. Today's webinar, as Jessica pointed out, will be available. We are recording it. It will be available to you. But if you'd like more information about OraSure products and services, contact Applicant Insight at the information, contact information here, and they'll be able to help you. And with that, thank you for attending today, and I'll turn the microphone back over to Jessica.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Bon. On behalf of OraSure Technologies, we hope that you have found today's presentation informative and helpful. This presentation was recorded, and you will receive instructions informing you how to access the recording. Thank you for your attendance today. This concludes today's webinar.